So, what does it actually look like if somebody changes their mindset regarding a certain aspect? What does it look like before, and what does it look like afterwards when a mindset shift has taken place? How does that play out then in the way how somebody shows up? One important way in which our thinking about a certain language has real impact on how we show up to our language learning is our thinking about the prestige, the value, the social value of a language. Linguistic prestige is really a thing. It basically reflects on what people and communities think about certain languages, how they would rank them in importance, in beauty, in significance, and so on. One example, for example, French. Many people consider French a language of high philosophical, intellectual pursuit, a language of beautiful literature, of a vast cultural history. And many people obsess too much about one variant of French, and that is the Parisian French. Now, of course, Parisian French is beautiful, and Paris is a wonderful city, right? It's a magnet for tourists and for historians and scholars. But you have so many vast communities in the world that speak French. A part of Canada speaks French. People in Belgium, in Switzerland, and other European countries have French as their official language. You have several African varieties in that in French, and for French, and so you have it spoken in the Caribbean. So French is way more than just Parisian French. But what many people kind of obsess about is also, and here's another mindset that comes in, it's that of perfectionism. Okay, so if I don't speak perfectly, if I cannot really attain that Parisian high intellectual kind of sounding French, then I delay my speaking. But we all know where that ends up. It ends up in actually not really learning to speak, not daring enough, not putting oneself out there enough. Now, this overestimation then, right, together with perfectionism, can actually um, lead to under communication, under developing of communicative skill, of writing, of talking. And that then also has implications for vocabulary learning, for showing up to learn the grammar, and so on and so forth. Now, a healthy view of the prestige of a language would be to acknowledge, yes, French is a global language. It's a language that has several millions of people that speak it as a mother tongue, and there's so many variants of it. So, in order to embrace all of these to some extent, or to bring them into the boat on board in my language learning journey, I can really make use of a comedy that comes from Senegal, watch a documentary that comes from Quebec, um, listen to a waffle recipe from Belgium, whatever it is. Introduce more of the non Parisian, non highly prestige language variants of, in this case, French. You may also kind of extrapolate that to other languages. But my point is that if we want to view the prestige and the importance that languages undoubtedly have in their vastness, in the amount of their speakers, and all of that, then we should kind of put our fishnets out there a little bit more and really make use of so many variants that are there so that we can really drop the whole thing of perfectionism and say, you know what, um, I don't have to sound like a French person from Paris. I can also sound like a fisher from from Corsica. I can, sound like somebody who comes from Quebec. The main thing is that I keep going, that I show up, and I can always polish down the road. Okay, so it can really lead to paralysis, to overestimate, and to wrongly understand the prestige of a language. To add a little personal anecdote or experience to the whole issue of linguistic prestige, I come from a multicultural family, and my mom came from Czechoslovakia. She was fluent in Hungarian and in Slovak, But however, the context in which I grew up and in which we lived in Germany under communism in the GDR, there already Russian was a language that majority of the school kids had to learn. It was not optional, it was mandatory. And many people didn't like Russian. The majority didn't like Russian. And Slovak, being an Eastern European language, was kind of put prestige wise into the same category as Russian. It's a different language, right? I mean, yeah, all of them come from the Slavonic language family, but they made people around my parents, and especially my mom, made no encouraging comments, nothing that would have helped her to actually feel encouraged to teach us kids, me and my sibling, that language. So I did not grow up bilingually. I only grew up with German, which is also nice, but I could have grown up bilingually, and that would have been even nicer. And I realized that also through my teenage years and my early adulthood years, where I could have made more strides and efforts to actually learn that language, that I realized that also I did not value that language as prestigious enough to actually spend time and effort on it. So I realized how I never really got into the grammar before. Didn't really make an effort regarding vocabulary. I was open-minded enough to, always when we went to visit family in Slovakia to see and to pick up phrases and learn certain words. But I never got myself around to actually do an effort, do an orchestrated, intentional effort to learn a little bit more and to lift my language learning to a higher level. And I realized that it has to do with several reasons, but language prestige, how I thought about the importance, the beauty, and so on of that language, played a huge role. And I'm still in the process of changing that. I mean, whoever deals with conceptions and emotions towards something knows that you may want to change it, but it may actually take some time to do so. But that is why we are talking about mindset. This is exactly why it matters to become more and more aware of how one actually thinks about language and about language learning. Another mindset shift that actually has a huge impact on how we show up for our language learning is to come to terms with one's age and to actually realize that just because I'm already in my 50s or 60s doesn't mean that the train is gone, that I cannot dive into a language anymore and cannot really make efforts and have accomplishments. So I had a student and he was already older, and I met him when he was already, in his late 50s. And I wasn't his teacher at that time and his mentor, but before that already, he had a mindset shift. And he later told me about that. And he said, you know what, at first I was discouraged and I didn't really put much effort and verve and blood and sweat into my German learning. It was German for him. But it's simply because I thought that I'm too old. I do not do it anymore as fast as I would have done it in my college years. But then, and I don't know what kind of experience or conversation he had with somebody, but his thinking shifted. And he was like, you know what? Yeah, it's true. I'm kind of in the second half of my life and I have a plate full of commitments, family life, a very, very busy job. But I just keep being at it at my own pace. Nobody tells me how much I have to do. I'm not learning it for professional reasons, so I don't have deadlines to pass any tests or proficiency levels. I can just chip away and just look at things that are interesting for me, and I do it at my own pace. And however much I'm doing, that will be it. And so making peace with that actually freed him and freed energy. It set energy free to actually dive in. And his German, man, it's good pronunciation wise, and he is not afraid to speak, and he is just you can see and you can sense in him that his age is not a roadblock at all for him. It's not even crossing his mind anymore that he could be too old to understand a certain grammatical element or something, because also it's objectively wrong. We're never too old to that, unless we have really neurological issues where we cannot learn anymore. But normally, it would not be a problem to continue learning until we are in high age. I had another student, and he actually grew up bilingually. And he then later in his high school academy years had to learn French. And it wasn't too good. The teacher was not very motivating, and the material wasn't nice. And he was a teenager, and so French was the last thing on his mind. And when he came to college and university, he had to study at least two ancient languages. And because of his high school experience with French, he thought that he's just not good at languages because it was so tedious, right? And so he carried over the feeling of kind of being a failure at languages and kind of a fixed mindset that, well, I'm just not good with that. Yes, I know two languages, but that's only because I grew up bilingually, so that was easier. But now it's not so easy anymore. I'm also older. So a wrong perception in regards to the importance of age, a wrong perception also in regards to, a fixed mindset versus growth mindset. Several things came together in his thinking. And when we had class together, I kind of talked about language and language learning in a way that encouraged him to try again, because that was a language he really had to learn. So he had no choice there. But also he wanted to come to a point where he wanted to learn it. And so, feeling encouraged, he now started to sit down and to really gave it his all in that semester in regards to learning that language. And it was interesting to see that he didn't wait to be motivated. And he didn't wait to have big moments of, oh, it clicked here or it clicked there. He just chipped away. He showed up. And that is the most important thing. This is the goal also of my work, that I empower people to show up, because we know when they show up and invest the time and invest the mental energy and really do the work, whatever work it is, can be very pleasant. The work doesn't mean it needs to be tedious, but to do the activities that are necessary to learn the words and to use them. If people show up, then they also make progress. The hard thing is to actually get oneself to consistently show up with an open mind and with curiosity, right? And so when that student actually realized, okay, I am able to simply put in the time and to do the work, and then he saw progress, and nothing motivates more than progress, by the way, nothing. He saw progress. Oh my goodness, he was gang-ho, he was on fire. And he realized that he could have had the same experience back then in high school with French. But his thinking about language and also the phase of life where he was in kind of did not prime him to actually have that type of experience, right? But now he was a little bit older, a bit more settled, had more educational experience. And so now it was possible for him to think in totally new ways, because also thinking in new ways also sometimes comes with a certain level of discomfort, right? I mean, the old way thinking is comfortable. It may not always be helpful or effective. It may actually sabotage our efforts, but they feel comfortable. They feel familiar. So new ways of thinking oftentimes may feel uncomfortable. They may also feel invigorating, right? They may also feel like, oh, something new, it's magical. But they can also feel kind of uncomfortable, and people may shy away from that. And so it was very, very cool to see him actually enjoy the semester that we had, and to realize that he could actually keep going. And it was his plan to keep going with that language and to learn more and to really go way beyond the proficiency level that he needed for his university studies. Another example that comes to my mind of how a language mindset shift can actually pay big, big dividends is for people when they realize that language learning should be considered as an act of seeking and getting and also improving connection. It's not just a chore. It's not just something that should feel like work or homework with drills and so on. These may all be very good and actually necessary activities for mastering a language. However, if that is our primary way of thinking about language learning, then we're missing out. And we also may realize that we stagnate. So, one example is a student that I had, and she really approached language learning as this chore thing that she, had to get through, and you have to kind of tighten up and really sit down and so on. And there were various aspects also around that, but it was mainly this chore thinking that kind of helped her to come up with some grit and discipline, but it seemed lifeless. There was no curiosity. Vividness was stifled, and she did not really reach out to other people. And we know that if you don't really practice a language, right, with speaking, with writing, then it's way harder to actually acquire it. And when she realized that language is primarily about connection, that language is a tool, it is a social tool, then many things changed for her. And this is not just something that applies for extroverts, it can also be for introverts. There is no limit here. This is not just bound to a certain personality. Language is a tool, and language is first and foremost a social tool. If that social aspect is confined and limited to watching recipes or watching TV shows in the target language, hey, so be it. But if you dare to actually talk with people of that target language, with the natives, or you travel to the country and you really see conversation with the locals, or you're having a community at home or at your university, at your institution, maybe at your in your family that speak the target language, connection is what it's all about. And so that student then did not just focus on certain charts and information and data, as important as that is, but she actually acquired a lot of that by chatting with friends who were living in a country where the target language was spoken. She was watching cooking videos. She loved kind of getting recipes from that country. And she was just very much engaged also in things in the target language that were her hobbies anyway. And so she integrated that language learning very nicely into her everyday life. And so every day she had encounters and immersion moments with that target language that she was learning, and she just progressed. She just progressed. It was beautiful. And again, nothing is more invigorating and motivating than progress. A student of mine, let's call him Tom, was thinking that if you really want to learn a language and want to learn it well, you have to have a lot of willpower. You have to have a lot of grit and discipline. Now, yes, that is true. The question is, what fuels that willpower? What fuels the grit and the discipline? What can hinder it? What can really advance it? Now, the person, Tom, was in a little bit of a bind. He wanted to really show up, but oftentimes he didn't feel motivated. And so he thought, well, I don't have really a motivation, so I have to grind my teeth and kind of go through that. What we discovered together is that his daily life did not include any habits that would make language learning easier. Oftentimes, it's not so much about willpower itself. It is what we do with the willpower that we have, and that we create tiny habits, little nudges, little moments of nudges that kind of really nudge us into the direction of doing something with the language throughout the day. Now, so he started to integrate vocabulary kind of retrieval from the day before and when he was drinking his morning coffee. Okay, so he had already prepared the evening before. He had a list of the vocabulary that he had learned before, and he had it lying there at his coffee machine. So first thing in the morning, after getting up or writing in a journal or diary, or reflecting over the day or the agenda he had for the day, connecting with his kids and his wife, First thing after that, when he made his coffee, he would look over his vocabulary. He would take a blank sheet of paper and write out the all the words that came to his mind, kind of just retrieving from memory. And then he would look at the vocabulary list and compare. Okay, so how much could I remember from the day before? And so integrating that little practice, 10 minutes each day, and tying it to something that he was already doing anyway, was an excellent way for him to do something during the day, already in the morning. And that knowledge, okay, I did something already for my language learning, that carried him through the day. And that made it possible to be also and to feel motivated to do also other things for his language learning. And so he implemented several little habits, sometimes rotating them, sometimes doing them really every day, connecting them to things he was already doing anyway. And he realized how showing up consistently actually led to progress. And it wasn't the grinding that he experienced with languages before. It wasn't this kind of feeling of, okay, I have to sit down now. I hope the muse kisses me. I hope something happens now that really makes me want to do this, because I really don't feel like I want to do this. No, he tied it to habits and it flowed automatically. And that is something that several authors already wrote about, right? So we have the book Atomic Habits, I think by James Clear, and many other books that actually speak about the benefits of establishing very intentional habits that can help us to do something, to learn something, to make progress in something, and to connect to an activity or an endeavor that already earlier we decided we want to connect to. All these stories show that there really is a before and an after when we're talking about a shift in our thinking, a shift in our approach to language and language learning. So click on video number 5. Let's bring it home. What can be done that really helps us to become aware of how we think about language and language learning, but not to drag that process out over several years, painfully, making our experiences wasting time, wasting precious money, wasting precious energy on figuring something out that we could have known before earlier and that we could have actually used and benefited from earlier. So click on video number 5 and I tell you something that is really exciting.